Good evening and welcome to Diversionary Theater's Intersectionality and Justice panel discussion. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that Diversionary Theater resides on the land of the Ipai Tipai, also known as the Kumeyaay Nation. We pay respect to the many elders and to the tribe of this land, both past, present, and future. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our facilitator for tonight's discussion. Please help me welcome a true Diversionary favorite. She is a talented actor and a superb educator. Please help me welcome Andrea Agosto.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I am, as you have already heard, my name is Andrea Agosto. My pronouns are she, her. And I just have a couple of things that I want to touch on before we dive really deep into this discussion. I want to first thank Diversionary for allowing us use of their cyberspace and Zoom this evening as well. In the first conversation, we talked about how race and intersectionality are represented in the theater. Intersectionality, as originally advanced by Kimberley Crenshaw, speaks to an understanding of the complex and multiple ways in which various systems of subordination can come together at the same time. Adopting this intersectional framework fosters the exploration of differences within and between communities and groups, taking stock of historical issues, socio-political contexts, while still maintaining an awareness of racial inequalities. That being said, we then were met with more questions as this topic is timely, but it also affects every person, each person, in very many ways. Focus of tonight's conversation will be about intersectionality and racial justice for BIQDPOC, Black, Indigenous, queer, trans people of color, in regards to programming and the journey of from page to stage. We're going to explore the lenses through which we view intersectionality, how it currently affects programming, and looking forward to the future of San Diego theater. So for our conversation tonight, just some things to keep in mind. We are in a Zoom room with people of all types of experiences and proximity to the LGBTQ+ community. Some may identify with the community and others may be allies. Because we've all decided that this is where we would like to be this evening, let's all just keep in mind that we are here to learn, share, and listen. We're going to be here with open minds and open hearts. We're going to believe that people are here with their best intentions. That being said, if something is said that is hurtful, the error will be acknowledged and explained. We all grew up in this oppressive and racist system, and we all want to make it better. No one on this panel, no one in this Zoom room is a representative or spokesperson for the communities that which they identify. We will honor as many voices as we can this evening, but an hour and a half for this topic may be a little too short for us to get to each individual question towards the end. Thank you so much for allowing me that space. And so now let's begin by getting to know our panelists. So as I said, my name is Andrea Agosto. My pronouns are she, her. And panelists, when I call your first name, could you introduce yourself by saying your name, your pronouns, as well as your connection to the theater community? Kimberley.
Hi, hello. I'm Kimberley King. I am a they, them, also a she, her, they, them. And my relationship to the theater community, well, my goodness, I have 3 children who are all stage babies. So that I got in there through the back door with the parent angle. And I am now co-founder with my youngest son of Teenage Youth Performing Arts Theater Company, Type A Theater Company, where we serve BIPOC teens and their families and allies.
Awesome, thank you so much. Next, George.
Hi everyone, I'm George. She, hers, or they, them pronouns. I am a sort of former theater kid. I was in theater in high school in Oklahoma, but now I mainly focus on studying theater, studying representation. I'm a recent graduate of Pitzer College.
Awesome, thank you so much. Kim.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kim Heil. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the associate producer and casting director at San Diego Repertory Theater.
And last but certainly not least, Kenny.
Halka Menuea, Memeyut the Menue, Inyach Kenny Ramos, Wichihi, Inyan Yue Wichihi Benegas, Napum Welch, Queshamak, Barona, Indian Reservation, Kupai. Hello everyone, my name is Kenny Ramos. I'm Degenyo Ipai Kumiai from the Brona Band of Mission Indians, and I grew up on the Brona Indian Reservation here in San Diego County, just East County. And yes, my pronouns are he, him, or they, theirs. But although in my traditional Kumeyaay language, we do not have gender pronouns. And oh, my connection to the theater community. Well, I grew up in this theater community. I started out at Christian Youth Theater, and then got my professional start at Starlight in Balboa Park, and then Moonlight Stage Productions. But now I'm an ensemble member at Cornerstone Theater Company and Native Voices at the Autry. Both are located in Tom Longar, which is the Los Angeles area. And yes, I just love doing theater, and yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that jolt of energy. Thank you for that. All right, so let's get started. In this one, we'll just take some turns. I know we're going to try to let it flow as much as we can. And I know that some things may be a little bit more pressing and that we're ready to just burst with information to share. So let's make sure that we are being cognizant of who is speaking. That is all I ask. So how do you think that intersectionality is viewed in the arts? Like, how are we seeing that on our stages? How are we looking at intersectionality from a theatrical perspective?
Well, I'll start because I also have a background in dramaturgy. I took my master's from San Diego State, go Aztecs, in dramaturgy. So I'm always, the research angle of anything on stage is always fascinating to me. And when I saw that question, it gave me pause, because I don't have an explicit, I don't have any explicit experience with intersectionality being something primary, in a stage work that I could bring to mind. Now, after I started thinking about it a while, I started thinking about some pieces that, they built upon the different identities of characters, and that kind of created some tension. And Kim knows, I'm talking about, I was really thinking about Sweat pretty recently. And we'll probably talk about that later, but it built on so many different identities and how that pushed and pulled the whole story together and apart. But yeah, it's very interesting that of all the things to deal with, I mean, unless I'm looking at a monologue and somebody being raw and giving, I have a hard time thinking, how do we in theater explicitly deal, for lack of a better word, deal with intersectionality?
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Okay. So I believe anyway that intersectionality has been posited as an academic theory. And I will say that in the artistic room, academic theories are rarely, if ever, discussed. In my experience, right? Because, and I'm not trying to discredit it. In fact, I am a huge admirer of Kimberly Crenshaw's work, and I want to pay as much respect to it as we can in this conversation. But I also have to recognize that artists, and maybe I am trying to speak only for artists in the theater, although I think there is a broader generalization that can be made, that artists deal so much more with just the internal human experience that is outside of sort of an academic framework. And I do love how Crenshaw relates the two in her work, but I just want to take a step outside of that for a moment and just to say that the intersectionality that we live and breathe in the theater is very personal. It's very grounded in life experience, and it's very
Mhm.
grounded in the relationships we have with one another when we work on a piece of art. And I think that the complications that arise from that are the same kinds of complications that she talks about that are systemic, because I think that she does really want to examine systemic oppression and racism, as opposed to using, the idea of intersectionality as a divisive tool among people. And so I believe that intersectionality is very much present in how we engage with theater. And certainly I believe that artists and storytellers are incredibly cognizant of intersectionality, even if they don't necessarily name it within that academic framework. In that the people that we tell stories about and the communities we tell stories about are incredibly complicated and multidimensional. And therefore, it is just intersectional by nature. And then the art itself is intersectional by nature. And it comes with all the complications and the nuances that that word implies.
You know what, Kim, that is so, I'm pouncing because that's so profound, and it made me think about, also when I was thinking about that question, is that when we look at who's directing these shows, because a lot of playwrights, I feel as a dramaturg, when I'm reading a piece and I'm trying to, make sure that the honesty and the verisimilitude of the playwright is the thing that's forefront, right? That's
Yes.
the thing that gets recognized and considered. But the director has to make a choice. Directors make choices. They make choices and they have visions. Maybe they don't always make that choice. It's something that comes from within, it wells up, and the play is speaking to them a certain way. So wherever they're coming from, that also really shapes what we're going to be experiencing as an audience, right? What intersectionality, what identities are important, air quote, right? Which are important to that director. Those are the ones that you see on the stage. So when you look around at who's directing, and we're talking about coast to coast, we're looking around at who's directing plays for the most part, then you know why maybe there's not such an explicit answer to that question, right? Because we talked a long time ago, I don't know if anybody remembers, I seem to be the only one who remembers, that was like 5 years ago, the whole theater community, coast to coast, was talking about 50-50 by 2020.
Oh,
do you remember
yes.
that?
I totally remember it.
Where is that? We said it's going to be 50% female playwrights, all the shows and every theater, 50% playwrights, people of color. What? It's like a time warp that we're in right now. That is not on the scene. We're still, I don't know the figure, but I'm going to venture to say in the high 80%, it's probably 90, but the high 80% of white male directors, coast to coast. I take a great big aggregate, and bless their hearts, we're looking at what's important, what their vision is on the stage, no matter what the play is. You can pull all kinds of things from any kind of play. So I think that's another reason why we don't see like an explicit intersectionality as a theme on stage.
Yeah, I find like intersectionality as like a concept very hard to piggyback off both of what both of you just said. Like, it's a really hard sort of concept to grapple with and represent. And so I think sort of when I hear people talk about intersectionality, what they are meaning is representation, and that's the more sort of everyday meaning or usage of it, versus the Kimberly Crenshaw's meaning, which is just, in my reading, a legal framework, or a framework of reading something, of legality. But it, and how deep do we take our understanding of intersectionality then? Is it just in the text? Is it just in the actors? Does it also go to behind the scenes? Who's doing makeup? Who's doing costuming? Who's doing et cetera, et cetera? In my own, sort of experience with the theater theater culture in San Diego, I was part of a coalition of Afghans from around the country, where we realized that Diversionary was putting on a musical about Bache Bozi, which is also called Boy Play, which tackles, it's a really horrendous thing that happens in Afghanistan. And it's not that Afghans don't want that story told, we just don't want it told by white men, or we don't want it told by non-Afghans. We don't want, as queer Afghans, we don't want to be framed as where our sexuality is a deviancy, right? And so there's multiple layers to it. And how do we even also think about sort of how we engage in intersectionality as people residing in the imperial core, right? Do these same identities hold any weight if taken abroad?
Fascinating. Everyone is so wonderful, and I love what everyone is saying. And thank you for starting it off, Kimberly, too, because when I've thought about like the way that intersectionality has manifested in the American theater, in my experience, like it was hard to think about, because I'm not sure that it had in that way. And it is tied to who is sitting in the director seat and whose vision is being carried out and who is leading those conversations and yeah. And also Kim, yeah, that manifests with me too, because the idea of intersectionality I didn't hear about until I was in college, right? And it's never really, I've never heard it talked about in you know, in a spot on way within the theater. But I also think it's an interesting concept in that it asks us to think about our identity in these sections. And from an Indigenous framework, that doesn't necessarily add up, or it doesn't align with like a Indigenous or Kumeyaay framework in terms of separating aspects of our identity. And so I think it's interesting to talk about plays in the American theater that have been led from maybe a white, straight, cisgender, male gaze, and how intersectionality hasn't been a part of those conversations or a part of those pieces, or it hasn't been highlighted. And whereas with a lot of my work, which has been focused on uplifting and centering Indigenous perspectives and voices, it seems to be present in a lot of that work, but because of an Indigenous idea of how we are more than just these categories and labels that Eurocentric colonial Western ideas want us to be, right? So there was a point in my life when I stopped doing theater for 6 years, and it wasn't until I did a community engaged production with Cornerstone Theater Company that was written by Lakota playwright Larissa Fasthorse. And it was an amazing immersive theatrical play based on Indigenous stories shared by Indigenous people within the LA Basin. And recently I was reflecting on the role I played in that production, which was a queer Californian native character. And I hadn't even really thought about that character's like sexual orientation or queerness or gender identity, because it wasn't necessarily part of the intention, if that makes sense, to write a character of that way. It just was a natural thing to include in the character. And that was reflective of our Indigenous ways of knowing and understanding of being human and being community and being connected, if that makes sense. So I totally love what everyone's saying, and I just am happy to be a part of this conversation. And yeah, I think that there's a lot to talk about and unpack in how we think about intersectionality and how it applies to our work and how we can move forward.
Yes, all of us. Thank you. I am just gleaning. I'm over here head nodding. I'm all about that. So y'all are just feeding everything I need right now. So I definitely appreciate that. But I also want to talk about some things that you brought up, because now that we're on this, you know how this thought process goes, it keeps on going because everything is so interconnected. It is difficult to separate out parts of you, because then you're not a whole human. And then I also want to touch on something that Kim mentioned, like we don't want to use it to be divisive. And that's also part of the thing. How can we make sure that intersectionality is not seen as something to be divisive, And is that because of the way that it is centered? Are we centering too much on oppressions? Are we centering too much on deficits is not the correct word. Are we centering on the things that are stacked against us instead of focusing on the things that make us us? If that makes sense. Y'all are nodding, so I'm gonna go with
Yeah, I think, okay, so this is one way that I have been thinking about this a lot in terms of casting, which is, what I do. And because to me, I think I mentioned this before, to me, intersectionality, at least as it's been explored, is about systemic racism, right? It is about, obviously, the players, in the sense that there are people carrying out the systems, but it is really sort of a directive to look at the systems in place that are continuing white supremacy, continuing practices of oppression. So then I look at something like in theater, that the kind of conduit that I have any control over is casting, okay? And I thought about this a lot. The way casting has always been done, there is a traditional way you do it. You put out a breakdown, people submit, or they just go to the open call, they come in a room one at a time. Nowadays it's a video, and then they do their thing and then they leave, right? And I thought about that and I was like, how do we do this differently? How do we dismantle what this looks like, okay? And I wondered, is it in the physicality of the practice itself? Is it in the physicality of going to a place, showing up, doing your monologue and leaving? Is it there? Is it there? Because I personally have tried to do the thing where I am very actively recruiting. I'm not a passive casting director. I make calls, I make lists, I invite people. I make sure that communities know that we are looking, right? But that's not enough. That's more like a response to a larger problem. So I'm like thinking, how do we even just shift the model?
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny, Kimberly, you were talking about sweat, right? And sweat is an interesting example because Lynn Nottage was very specifically writing a story about a very specific historical time, a very specific community, and she was talking about race. And so, do you dare audition a white actor for a Black role? I don't dare that. Okay, I don't think it's right. And I will always lean towards the side of broadening my view in terms of casting people of color. So I was thinking, what if for one of those roles, a couple of those roles, that you deliberately, intentionally invite 10 people who are not, who do not match the breakdown in any way at all, right? So there was a character named Oscar. I should have called in actors. I should not should have, but now I'm thinking like under this experiment, what if I called in women, just to see what artistically happens. Now I also have to respect what the storyteller is trying to do, but this is an experiment. This is just an idea. And maybe sweat's not the best example, but that's what, for whatever reason, it already came to mind. You mentioned it, Kimberly. And so I was like, I'm not saying that in and of itself is the answer, but I'm saying that we have to think of those ways where we actually look at intersectionality in the face and decide artistically, can this be a moment of narrative liberation, right? Can we artistically blow our minds for just one or two, auditions? I don't know. Like, I'm just saying, can we blow this up a little bit? Why not?
Well, why not?
Exactly.
Why can't we?
Right.
Because
Right.
what did Willy Wonka say? We are the dreamers of dreams. We're the weavers. We're the ones doing the thing.
Right.
We just keep ourselves held to the old canon.
Yeah.
And mind blowing is that I got asked. I mean, it's not mind blowing. I'm very smart, but Jacole Kitchen, wonderful person over at La Jolla Playhouse and at the anyway, the SD PAL was holding the resume workshop for the All Cities auditions. And I got asked to be on the panel in case there were young people who wanted some information on their resumes. And I have never done that. So for me, I could just I was pulling stuff out of my hat and saying, and do this on your resume and don't do that and do this. And I don't know if that's the way that they had ever always done it or not, but I think that that's part of what our job is now in 2020, right? And going forward is blowing stuff up. I said, what about and one of the other, Christiane Kerner from New Village Art, she said, don't put your eye color on there. Don't put your hair color on your resume. I can look at you. I don't need to see that. And we also talked about, and this is getting more to the point, in your special skills area, some people put things like when they went to school, bioengineering, neurosciences, and now you're auditioning for a play. So that's a conversation piece, right? That's the whole person. That's a conversation starter. What happened with bioengineering and neurosciences that you're here auditioning right now for, Oklahoma? What gives, buddy, right? I feel like those are the conversations that we need to have. We see the actors as whole people and not this flat, you are the female character that is the love interest to our main character.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I think that's been the problem, and that's why we don't see intersectionality so much. Like, we can't put our fingers on our hands on it, and it stays so academic because we have been so used to watching on stage and casting, because that's the way it's been done, these kind of flat in the breakdown,
Yeah.
whatever the breakdown says, we need that flat character, we get that flat character, and the show must go on. But what about, we talk to the guy who's majored in neurosciences. What's going on with who is this person? And acting is an art, it's a skill, it's a calling. Put all of that up on stage. I think that, I know that's later on too, but in terms of where we're going with intersectionality, put all of that whole person on the stage. You just don't want someone just to be playing a role. I feel like theater is a place where we come in contact with ourselves. And I have never come in contact with I've never made a connection with an actor on stage that's playing a flat character. It has been when it is deep and meaty, and it's coming from like a real place that they made that identification. And I think that's how we're gonna, pull that intersectionality up onto the stage.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Yes.
Right. Yes, Kimberly. Yes. You got me so excited because, I mean, for so many reasons, both of you, but the idea of, again, just like honoring the human, right? And putting the emphasis on the human and the complexity of what that is, as opposed to, yes, these flat and these categories. And again, to me, it's a pushback against colonial structures, right? These settler colonialism informed by white supremacy, the ways that these things are, divide and separate and categorize and label. And that is just not working. That doesn't work. And to recenter about the human and the diversity and diverse arrays of experiences of human. And yes, oh gosh, I just love that. I do a lot of work in the Native community outside of my work in theater, although I very much see theater as a form of service to the Native community. I do a lot of work in other realms, and I've been in conversations recently with Randy Reinholz, who is the co-founding artistic director of Native Voices and teaches at SDSU, and he once asked me about, like, well, how can you, I know you do a lot of work in community, is there a way for you to put that on your resume? Which I thought was really interesting. So, because I do feel like a lot of my work outside of the theater within the Native community informs what I do on stage, because I prefer to work on plays that center Native experiences and communities. And so there's a lot of connection. And to me, that's what really helps elevate the work and what we do, is when we can find those ways that other aspects of the human connect to the piece or to the story that we're trying to tell. And it really results in, I think, having just a more connected human experience between the artists and the audience, and yes, just everything. I just love everything y'all saying. My gosh.
I really love your point, especially about community. I think that the theater needs to be viewed as as not just something that's perhaps separate or a place for the community to go or be represented by, but be an actual part of it. You know, I think going back to also this point on tearing down and also building up, right? We've seen that no part of settler colonialism, especially in this occupied land, you know, it destroys relationships. It destroys relationality to one another, to communities. You know, the fact that even this conversation about intersectionality sometimes can place different marginalized identities, communities, etc., at odds with one another, right? Like, oh, I want to tell my Afghan story, but I can't tell it, like, or I have to sort of seemingly force two disparate things or parts of myself together, but it's not the case. Yeah, I just really think, and if we involve more of the community, and that means going beyond just the theater bubble too, right? Whose stories, who's a playwright in this city, in San Diego, that we don't know? You know, we don't know what our Black trans sisters who are homeless want to say. We don't know anything about that because we're not looking, we're not asking. And so taking the theater as a space for community, I think, is important.
Oh, that was beautiful and lovely. I'm sorry, I was just snapping away over here. You are speaking to parts of me that I don't get to express or even have these conversations with, because as a middle school drama teacher, you know, the conversations that I have are very, very different. But still working with children and young people, they are people. They are just smaller, and they're learning to navigate this world. And learning this as a young artist, there are, you know, things that happen that make them very disillusioned right off the bat, whether it be, you know, appearance, it be race, it be weight. There are things that, you know, kind of, you know, stop them, so to speak. And trying to have these conversations with them at that young age, it's very, very difficult because, for one, you know, I am not in that position. I want so much to give, and not being able to really explain that the world is just, you know, not as great as it should be to a child that's crying in front of your face is not the easiest thing to do. And I want to make sure that we can continue to have theater for our young people. And I think it will get there. But as you all are saying, I do believe that there needs to be a shift. There has to be a fundamental change if we are going to continue the theater. And if we are not only going to continue it, but make it better than it already was, make it more equitable, so to speak. And then that drives me to this question. Does intersectionality support the idea of equity, or does it hinder liberation?
That is a good question. I feel like it can be a mix of both, right? In how people view intersectionality, because if we aren't sort of tearing down and building something new, then I feel sometimes the conversation about intersectionality can be about how can we represent ourselves to the dominant power structure. And if that dominant power structure is not questioned or, I mean, ideally just taken down and dismantled completely, then it can hinder liberation in that sense, like the total liberation of people. But I don't think it necessarily has to be a hindrance. I think intersectionality is dynamic. It's natural. It's something that is so part of everyday life. Like, it's just a way you can just sort of look around you and see intersectionality. You can look at yourself and see things that are intersectional. But when it becomes the sort of institutional thing that people are perhaps trying to fulfill, oh, we are an intersectional institution as a buzzword, that is where it can get sort of messy to me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, George. That is well said, because I'll say, I mean, I'll take it out of the academic and just bring it home for a minute. You know, I'm 53 and I am just now using my they, them pronoun. And this, you know, it's the way that we are brought up. And, you know, our parents, bless them, maybe they did, maybe they didn't know. I'm so jealous of you right now, Kenny, at being brought up as like a whole person. you just are who you are. No, I was a little girl. And then I was a little, and then not only at home, but everywhere I went, I was a little Black girl. I can't tell you how many times as a teenager when I would apply for a job or, just talk on the phone to make an appointment to meet someone. I got there and said, oh, you sound different on the telephone. You know what I'm saying? And that's what they were trying to say. Oh, you sound so educated on the telephone. I'm like, what were you expecting? Now, like I said, I'm 53, so we're talking about people felt free to talk like that back in the 70s and 80s. That was like, you need to forgive them that they don't understand that because of the stereotypes that have been proliferated globally. But this idea of intersectionality being liberating, to me, it's liberating because I see it as me being able to finally pull all of myself together and be a whole person. I've been compartmentalizing for about 50 years, all these different parts of me. And, I'm a single parent and trying to do all these little things. Sometimes I'm the mom, sometimes I'm the teacher, sometimes I'm the woman, sometimes, sometimes to get along in this American life, you have to compartmentalize, and you can lose your way in that. I certainly know that I did. And I'm really glad for these conversations. I'm glad for all the young people. I'm glad for this conversation. I'm glad for my children because it can be very liberating. As a buzzword type of thing, I think we owe it to ourselves to call that out, to call BS when we see BS. We're like, I'm not buying that. Whatever that is, take your commercial, you can just keep on going with that. We should just call that out when we see it. But let ourselves be free in our whole self. Recognize it, embrace it, and move forward with it. I do find it liberating.
Yeah, I think I would agree that that it definitely has the power to liberate. And I definitely appreciate that my children, my two biracial children, are growing up in a world where their biracial identity is not a source of conflict within them, that they embrace it. They navigate the world fairly smoothly, at least so far. We'll see. They're teenagers. But I'll tell you, for me personally, it's hard. It's hard because and it manifests. I'll just share like one way it manifests is through code switching, which is exhausting. It's so tiring. And what's funny is like, I did it so often, or have done it so often, that it got to a point really in my adulthood where I didn't even notice I was doing it until then. Now I'm being asked to sort of be more authentic and be more sort of, bold, and I'm being given permission as a woman of color to speak my truth, all those things, which is great. But it's exhausting to recognize how much emotional labor goes into navigating space and claiming space for yourself.
Yeah.
When you start to see it and you start to see where it's not happening and you start to recognize, oh my gosh, I got to do that now. Oh boy, that labor's hard. It's hard. And the code switching now, I do it and I feel it so acutely. And so now I'm like looking for the next stage. Like, when does this get easier again? Because right now it's like, I know this is necessary. I know this work has to happen in order to create space for people like me and my allies. But can it go back a little bit to normal where I could just, walk around and not even notice that I'm, recognizing what my defenses are in a room? I mean, it's funny. Like when I told some of my my white friends, do you do the thing when you walk into a room and you like immediately clock, okay, there's 3 people of color over there. There's 2 women over there. Okay, I'm safe. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh, you don't do that? But that's me navigating my intersectional identities to seek out safety and to seek out where I can be myself, right? Anyway, now that we're in a different time. Boy, it's good work. It's necessary work, but it is hard. It is hard. It is emotional labor, and I feel it.
Beautifully said. And as an Afro-Latina who navigates between communities and cultures, I code switch all the dang time. And I feel like, you know, like sometimes I'm just like, can I just be Andrea? Like, can I just be me for like 5 seconds? Because you compartmentalize, just as Kimberly said, we compartmentalize, we section off, and it feels like we're already cordoning off parts of ourselves, and we just hide them away and then bring it out when it's necessary or when it's approved. And that becomes a problem. The approved part becomes like, oh, I'm definitely upholding, I can feel it in myself. Like I'm upholding that white supremacist structure, saying that I have to speak this way in order for people to take me seriously, or for people to think that I am educated enough to have this position. I do this as an educator with my parents. I'm like, oh, hello. You know, I mean, like, I don't know what that voice is or where it comes from. It's like a self-defense mechanism. But then there's also now educators like advocating students, you know, not to code switch, because they're saying, I'm not going to try to teach you to survive. Code switching is a survival skill, and I want to teach you to live. And I find that very, very powerful. And I'm like, why can't you go back in time and be my teacher? So there are things that are still happening, but there are also things that we are constantly now examining and very much aware of. And during our political climate, the way that things are right now, to be conscious of that while living through this historic event, while living through this political climate, it is a lot of emotional labor on so many people. And so many of them are struggling with this, like by themselves. And how do we, like as organizations, as theater makers, as artists, go about, you know, reaching those kinds of people, those stories, and like having those conversations about those stories, about the fact that we are actually going through not just the pandemic and this political situation, but our own emotional labor as far as our identities are concerned, or how they're perceived in society. And how do we go about changing these narratives? How do we show how these things affect us as well? Because that's the other thing. A lot of times we don't even get to see these kinds of stories on stage, in movies, even in commercials. Like, you got 30 seconds, you could probably say a little something, but we don't get to see it. And how do we get to that point where we can actually show more authentic explorations of identity on stage? Breathe now.
Well, I guess it depends on who's the we. It's usually who's in charge. I have a wonderful opportunity with the rep, as a matter of fact. Their literary manager, their dramaturg, Danielle, she sends out plays, and she's got readers, but probably, I don't know, probably some of you are readers, maybe, it could very well be. She's got readers all over the county reading different plays, and I feel like that is a really wonderful way. She's, you know, one person, she's got a lot to do over there. So if people of different backgrounds reading all these different plays and kind of giving their input on, well, to me, as a, you know, fill in the blank, this play feels, you know, fill in the blank. And I think that's one good way that to broaden our horizons, those of us who work in theater, and look at what other playhouses are doing that may not necessarily speak to our particular demographic, or we didn't think that it would speak to our particular demographic. But there are ways to you know, envision plays and set plays that they could speak to, you know, a whole different group that you didn't think it would. I was just listening to a program the other day on NPR, so crazy that for the first time ever, they in somewhere in China, they put up A Raisin in the Sun. Did you hear that program too? And it was edifying for the audience. They just like had no idea. A lot of people said, their response was, I had no idea Black people went through that, you know, over there in America. People have some kind of different idea of America, and could also empathize with the oppression, with the feeling of, you know, being, having your neck stepped on in so many different ways. So I think there are ways, and we just have to broaden our horizons on what we're going to be willing to put up, what we're going to listen to, and listen to other people when they read plays. I'm on another committee, the Diversity Works Committee, with the San Diego Theater Educators Alliance. And we're in the process right now of just reading as many plays as we can for young people and trying to create some kind of rubric, whether to help teachers around the county, especially teachers right now who are asking for help are the ones who have really homogenous white populations. They're like, this social reckoning is happening, but our whole classroom is white and they're not really feeling it. So what am I supposed to do in my classroom to make sure that this stays, that it's relevant? So we're all just ordering like crazy all these different plays and reading them and saying, okay, this is appropriate for the class, and this one may be a little bit, just trying to put them in grade levels and help people expand their horizons from the canon. One of our members has this thing, and I'll send it to you guys if you want it. It's called the BIPOC Swap. It's a spreadsheet of all the different plays that we normally do, Guys and Dolls and The Christmas Carol, and other plays that have the same theme, but are written by a BIPOC playwright, right? And you could just as well do that to achieve the same purpose. You want to fill that winter spot, do this other play that has more of a diverse perspective. And so we need to do more things like that. It's really time consuming and it's very, very expensive to keep buying all these plays as much as I enjoy it, but that's what we have to do. And you have to make alliances with people from different places and get their perspective on different plays.
Yeah, and I would add to that from a programming perspective, and certainly from the producer's point of view, it's who you have in the room. Who do you have in the room with you when you are making artistic decisions? If you have a room of people who look like you, then there's a problem. If everyone looks like you, if everyone is a particular demographic, white cisgender male, then maybe you need to look up and think about inviting other people to that space, because you cannot underestimate that. You cannot underestimate the power of giving agency to voices that do not sound like your own. And that is hard work too, because I know a lot of people, they like to be the decision maker and they like to be the one who makes the big choices. But honestly, like that, to me, that's where it starts, is you surround yourself with people who are not like you.
Yes, and I would, yes. And I would also say that it is also like another thing to consider is, and whose land are you on? Like, and can those people be a part of the conversations? Can we be a part of the conversations? Can we be in the room? Can we be on the board? Can Indigenous people be involved? And can our perspectives be heard? Yes to everything. Yes, and.
Yes, and love that. Oh my goodness, y'all, this is very, very amazing. I also agree with all of that. I mean, we do need to I'm basically going to say what I say to people whenever they ask me why I care so much about representation. I'm like, it's for everyone. I know that you think that it's just for me. I mean, yes, of course, I'm going to advocate for my communities that I am a part of, because I do feel a sense of moral responsibility, and like not everybody does, and that's okay. But that's me. I want to make sure that my people are represented in their full humanity, that we are not tokenized, and that we're not pushed to the side, that we're not just these stereotypes that have existed since the inception of theater or film. I want to make sure that something moves forward. And so when we're talking about like putting people on the stage, we're not just talking about, oh, we just want people of color just to have them. And I think it's very, very important that everybody understands that it's also to show that we are human and that we are also worthy of respect, that we matter, that our cultures matter, that we are important, and that our differences are ones to be celebrated, not to be demonized. And I just wanted to throw that out there, because I know that representation thing gets kind of a little dicey, but it's very, very important that, it's for everyone. Representation is not just for me. It's not just for, a class full of white students. It's also for the class of Black students that's never gone outside of their hometown. I mean, I went to school with people that had never left Kansas City. They had never flown out of Kansas City, and we were all each other knew. It opens us all up. Go ahead.
And can I just add to that also, that representation, when done well, is intersectionality at its finest. Right? That is a moment where it works, because if you put up on your stage, if you are actively placing representation as a priority in your casting, in your programming, then that connects with people through intersectionality. I connect with, I saw LeBlanc by Lorraine Hansberry many, many years ago at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I'd never seen a Lorraine Hansberry play, and that play destroyed me in all the beautiful, necessary ways. Like, just, you know, I mean, it changed my life in so many ways. And so, you know, South Africa and apartheid, you know, all those things, not apartheid, anyway. But yeah, those themes, I'm Filipino. I grew up in Indonesia, like many continents away from that and many different years from that. Like, but there was something, and that is intersectionality at work. That is where the truth of that storytelling resonated with the truth somewhere in me.
You could hear me. Yes. Yes, all of that. Woo, okay. So speaking on all of that, how can we in San Diego, in the San Diego theater community, support BIPOC artists or even like theaters to make sure that they are promoting like equitable or even liberated treatment of their artists, of the plays that they're choosing? What are some things that we can do? What do you think? Just brainstorm. You don't have to solve the problem, but.
Well, it's always good when we support each other. We do. I mean, it's easier to say right now because we're COVID bound, and I always have, you know, huge plans on, I'm going to go see a play here and go there and go to everybody's plays. And then once you get your own seasons started at your own place, you realize you are just tethered. It's ridiculous, especially we're a small theater company. So have like 16 jobs and you can't get out as much as you would like to, but that's what we need to do. We need to get out and support each other and see what everybody else is doing. And I think that puts us in touch with lots of different actors, and it puts us in touch with playwrights that we, you know, probably wouldn't have, maybe not part of our own vision statement and mission statement at our own theater. I know I love going to Diversionary. They're always going to have something new and different and exciting for me to see. I've loved everything that I have seen there. And, you know, you might want to be a part of something that they're doing. You might find yourself wanting to, you know, be a guest. I love it when other companies call me and say, oh, will you dramaturg this, or will you help me write a piece for, you know, to promote this piece, or a research, you know, or an actor's packet or something for the kids to get into this. I love that because it's broadening, and we just have to do that cross-pollination better. It's hard because we're all very busy, but I think that's probably part of the work.
Definitely. We have to support each other. We have to build our community with one another.
If I could ask any, you know, because I'm in the community, it feels a little like, you know, yes, I want to support people, and I will, but I think what am I saying here? I want people outside the theater community to be more vocal of their support of storytelling that is not just diverse, but also, you know, takes risks. And we're never going to make it, like, we're not going to do it perfectly. We're never going to do it perfectly, quite frankly, but we're going to make mistakes as a community, right? We are inevitably going to make gestures and decisions that can offend, will offend people. And many times it'll be, you know, out of just whatever, like naivete or, you know, lack of budget, whatever it is. But if there are moments in the theater or any art really that resonate, that move you, as someone who is not part of that industry, if you have the time to speak up and say, thank you for telling that story, or thank you for, you know, programming that event, thank you for sharing the work of that artist, being able to say those things as an outsider, that as a producer and thinking about it from an institutional level is so impactful. It is so, so impactful when people who are not within the theater community can actually speak up in support of the theater community. So I of course, I love it when we all support each other, and I agree with Kimberly. Yes, we need to work together and support each other. And I am making an additional plea to those people who are not necessarily also part of the ecosystem, but perhaps are enjoying the art, to speak up when they enjoy the art.
You are so right, Kim, because when whenever I do a show at the Rep and there are talkbacks afterwards, the audience that comes to the talkbacks, either the pre or the post talkback, they want to express how it touched them. They want to express how they feel, and they're the ones who take it out into the world. You're right. We're in the ecosystem, so of course you're going to critique my work, and I'm going to watch the things that you do and critique your work. But that's what we do. Like it's almost ruined for us in a lot of ways. I can't watch. Unless I've had a few cocktails, I can hardly watch a movie without saying, "Oh my God, that's not even the way. What is with that lighting? Who did that wardrobe?" It's hard to, but it is the audience that carries it. It's like pollination, and we do need them to do that. We need to provide robust opportunities for them to do that.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's so important. And as someone who was just recently involved, and although it wasn't necessarily support all the way, but it was a collaborative effort with Diversionary to discuss the harm that a piece of media they've produced can do to a specific community, but it also means showing up for different communities, right? For our Kumeyaay comrades, for our Black comrades, for our Latinx comrades, right? Showing up and supporting them whenever they are, and within these spaces that need to be created by the theaters themselves, right? That allow for feedback from the community. Because again, if it's not community centered, it's basically nothing, right?
I love that. If it's not community centered, then it's nothing. How are we reaching our communities? How are we making theater accessible to our communities? How are we getting them in there? How are they going to see it if they can't afford a ticket? These are things to consider. Go ahead.
Yes, sorry. Well, no, yes. And again, I'm sorry, because I approach everything from a tribal framework, but I come from a community that has little to no access to theater, right? Like, so how, and when we're talking about community-centered and diverse perspectives, like, and we're all based here in San Diego County, and San Diego County is also home to more tribal nations than any other county in the entire country, with 18 tribal nations here in this county. How can we build bridges and relationships to get community that doesn't have access to this art form into the seats to engage with us, and then to help us tell more diverse and intersectional and whole stories about the human experience? I don't know, but yes, I'm always pushing, like, yes, tribal communities, let's partner with tribal communities and get tribal communities into our seats and engaged with this art form.
Conversations, they're always good to have, because you're going to share, you're going to pass on knowledge. And I'm just so thankful that this is, I don't know how many participants and people are in the webinar, but I'm so glad that whoever's here got to hear that, Kenny, because, we're in the theater company, but in the business, but we don't know all the answers. It's not like we're deliberately, there's nothing deliberate about our disconnection. Wherever we are disconnected, wherever our lack is, wherever our want is, I think for most of us, the ones that I know anyway, it is not deliberate. It is a matter of, hey, come help me out. And people come and see how theater actually works when they get in there and they volunteer and they see what's actually happening. They're just like, oh my God, how do you do this and still, live your life? I can't believe you're not eating ramen and hot dogs every single night. How do you live, But when people see conversations like this and they see, we are trying. The outreach is the thing. It's like you said, it's like George said, if it's not for the people, then it's just I'm sorry, it's masturbation. You are only pleasing who's always been going. Who are you helping? I've been teaching for 25 years at elementary school, and it's the same concept of student-centered learning. If I go into that classroom and it's all about me when I walk in there, who am I helping? What am I doing? Why am I there? I'm not a sixth grader. It's got to be centered on the needs of the people who just got to the room, not the people who have been in the room.
Yes. We do have to start considering those around us. We have to consider where we are. We have to consider the people that are around us, because those are stories that are also waiting to be told. We don't know, there might be a playwright out there in the community right now, and they might not even think that they have the opportunity or that they are going to be worth any opportunity that comes their way. But if there's something local that they can attach to, that would really, really help. And so that's where our local theaters can come in. Our local theaters can support our budding artists, our budding playwrights. We can build these connections and build these bridges. I love the idea of community. I love bringing people to the theater. I was so lucky to bring my kids to see a show at Diversionary that I was in, and I had never had that experience before as an educator, where my students would actually watch me perform, and it was amazing. It also created a bond between them as students and with me as a class. We had something to continuously talk about, go back to, refer back, think about that experience, what they learned as they looked at the theater. And these are things that not every kid's being exposed to, though. I'm just one person, and this is one theater. There are millions of children whose stories that they don't get to see told, that they don't even get to see themselves represented, that they don't have somebody in their life that can give them that opportunity. So when we create community, we create it for us all. And I just love that concept. I love it so much, because that's also what we're studying in school. So I love it a lot. And I think it's very, very important, because that's also how we take care of each other. It's how we take care of ourselves. It's also how we foster empathy, to be more understanding of what other people are going through. And when we've all got empathy down, can you imagine how boss the human race would be if we have empathy down? I can't, oh my gosh, we have so much potential for love and hope. And I'm calm down, I'll calm down. But there's so much potential for love, hope, and community and togetherness. And I think that's what we really, really want. It's just trying to find that way to get there in a way that is, fair for everyone, in a way that everybody's voice is heard, and that we can move forward together. And we just got to keep working on it. I mean, this is part of the process. This is one conversation here, and who knows how many are happening around the country, around the globe. And I sincerely hope, I don't have wood, I knocked on my hand, but I sincerely hope that it continues and it keeps growing. Thank you all so much. I do want to open this time for any attendees who might want to ask a question as well. So attendees, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the Q&A. It's not the chat. There's a little button that has Q, the and or ampersand, and the A. That's the English teacher. Oh, actually, this is something that maybe we can still define now. Does anybody want to define code switching for us? Because we all might have different experiences with that too.
Well, since I brought it up, I think I will take a stab at it, at least as what it means to me. And certainly maybe this is not the definition you'd find in a textbook or in an academic journal, but it is the idea that identity and communication exists within cultural norms and language, literal language, that you understand and know with your various communities. So for instance, with my family, I speak and talk and behave in a very specific way that is allowable by my Roman Catholic Filipino immigrant and very traditional family life. And so my accent does switch, it turns a little bit, just to give you an example, to you guys I'll say okay, but to my parents I'll say okay. You can hear it, right? It's very subtle, but that's code switching. Okay, Okay. Right. And so that's a literal kind of manifestation of it. But it's also like, I don't, you don't man spread in front of my mom. Like my mom's very like into, being a lady. And so I have to behave like a lady in front of her. But then with my theater buddies, I'm just like, oh, so that is the idea of code switching is just changing, oh gosh, what do you call it? Like behavioral and social cues and body language and even your voice. Yeah. And then like how I am with my friends who I went to college with is different from how I am with my friends now. How I am with my coworkers is different from when I'm doing a show at Diversionary. It's like, anyway, sorry. Other people, please define.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That's what we do.
Yeah.
That is what we do we are different ways with different groups. I have an older son, and I think he tried to make his worlds collide. He just refused to do it. And he had a birthday party one year after he was an adult, but he lived in a small place. So he had at my house, brought them all to my house. And you could see that he knew them all from different places because they were all potting together in different parts of the house. And he was just like trying to be himself. It's like, I think we have to do more of that because it was warming for me as his parent to see that, wow, he is not even trying to mess with that. He is himself in every single pod that he goes to. And now they have a reckoning with themselves. It's like, why do you like Zach? Well, he's himself everywhere he goes. And yeah, we have to find a way to break that down. He's braver than I, because I did like you for the longest time. Now that my grandmother has passed, I think I will man spread anywhere. It doesn't matter. My mom, she just has to put up with it. She doesn't like it, but she puts up with it. But grandma made that happen, But it is true. I think in academic world, we might call it colloquialisms.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yes. Oh, I don't know. Oh, I know. Then I unmute myself. Yeah. But yes, yes to all these things. I wonder about the difference of code switching in a social context and in code switching in like a professional context, or and the weight and harm of having to code switch within an environment where maybe my views as a Native person, as a Kungai person, as an Indigenous person are not hot. They're not the hot take of the office or whatever, right? Like, because anyway, and I think that kind of code switching is where the harm comes in, or the damage to ourselves.
Yeah, it's erasure. It's a form of erasure.
Sacrificing, right? We have to sacrifice aspects of maybe my cultural identity or my cultural outlook to fit into this construct just to find success or to succeed. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank y'all for that. Yeah, I code switch in my Spanish. I code switch in English. It's kind of it's exhausting. I'm just gonna say it. It's very tiring. But you find, and like I was saying, it's very much a survival skill. You feel like you have to do this, and it could be either a survival skill, like, oh, I don't want to upset my mother, so I'm going to do this, or I don't want to disrespect somebody, so I'm going to speak my Spanish this way. But you do find ways of kind of also boxing yourself in by allowing it to continue. Kimberly said something so earlier that it was like we hold ourselves captive, and we do, and we're indoctrinated in these things, and so we kind of stay within them, and we have to also be a part of our own liberation. We have to liberate the self first as well. So that's also something that we have to consider. So also, another question from the audience. How do you practice or honor your own intersectionality within your own communities? Ooh.
I'll take a stab at this one first, because I know who said it. Halkahuan, I know who. Hi, thanks for watching. That's a great question. And actually, I grappled with that a lot myself and was asked about that recently, because I also am part Filipino, Kim. Yeah, I'm Hawaiian Filipino through my dad's family, but I grew up with my mom's community on the reservation and within my tribal community, and so that tends to inform a lot of my experience and my outlook. And that's I feel like the cultural identity that is most precious to me and that I was mostly raised in, although I was also raised to be very connected and aware of my Hawaiian Filipino roots and visiting my family in Hawaii, but never the Philippines. Somewhat connected, but I was asked, and then of course, my non-heteronormative identity, which is, yeah, I mean, that's complicated because then that comes into conflict with maybe an Indigenous framework of gender and sexuality. And it's not necessarily Indigenous to separate those things from the human, although there are specific cultural roles within individual tribal communities that are meant for people who are not heteronormative, essentially. So like two-spirit roles within specific communities. But anyway, back to the question at hand, how do I grapple with that? I don't know. I think it's challenging. I mean, I think one way is that I am connected to those roots and to those stories and to my family members in both those ways, in my tribal community and then within my father's family. And so I grapple with it by being connected and understanding the history of those experiences and how those inform who I am today and how those experiences have led me to be here today. But I don't know that I do the best job. And this is where the question that I was asked back in January, it was by another Filipino theater artist. And she asked me about like engaging in work of that nature in terms of an Asian American experience, or as a Filipino person, what do I do to really uplift that part of my identity? And I really didn't know what to say. And now I don't know what to say because I feel so, I mean, the way I feel like I experience and see the world is through the lens of a Kumeyaay person. And I don't know, I think it's difficult to try and honor all aspects of your identity. And I'm also sorry, I'm just dissecting my identity over here. No one asked for that. But I'm also happen to be part white through both of my parents, but both of them were, like my mother's father didn't want anything to do with a Native family. So she never knew that side of her family. And similar on my father's side, his mother is Italian and she was cut off from her family for marrying my grandfather, who's Hawaiian Filipino. So there's also kind of like a missing piece of heritage that I don't know that I will ever connect to, because I don't live as a Italian person, and I just don't know those connections, and white supremacy and racism have played out so that both of my parents lived their lives separate from those identities. But I don't know, it's a very interesting question. But but I swear I'll wrap it up right now, is that I feel strongly and most passionately about my Kumeyaay identity because of the history of how settler colonialism has affected Native communities and how we've been able to survive. And so understanding how my ancestors have survived through waves and waves and waves of settler colonial violence. Literally, there was a time when California Indians were hunted by the California state government and killed legally, and then that was funded by the United States federal government. And when I think of the context of that, of everything that my ancestors did to survive, to bring me this identity, I then fall in line with like really wanting to honor my Kumeyaay identity first and foremost, because it's honoring the continued survival of a culture and a people and a nation that literally is not meant to be here right now. The United States was, and before this being the United States, California was part of Mexico, and before that, the Spanish mission system, like there have been waves of settler colonial violence that have been with the intention of destroying the Kumeyaay people and nation and outlook and our cultural identity. And so for me, it's my responsibility to my tribal nation that I am legally and culturally connected to, the Barona Band of Mission Indians, to uphold that identity and honor that identity and lead with that identity and that part of myself. Yikes, that was a lot.
It's a big topic. Like, I mean, of course it was going to be a lot. No worries. Go ahead.
I have a brief-ish answer to that, which is that in my community, food, if you commune and gather over food, then it's almost like everything else is forgiven. You know, like if you're able to enjoy, in our community, in the Filipino community, sinigang is a favorite dish, for instance. If you can connect over a good bowl of sinigang, doesn't matter if you're, you know, yeah, doesn't matter. All those different axes of identity, if you can connect over the food, you're good.
Yes, that is the best answer. Food is the correct answer. That is the correct answer. Food, it's their food, everybody. But I love, but I think also the tie of food and family together, right? Like, and the ways that foods manifest within our communities. And yes, I love that answer. Thank you for sharing that.
I think
Yeah.
theater is a really great connective piece to honor our intersectionality. A lot of us feel at home with our theater communities. You feel like, oh, I can relax. I don't have to be one thing or the other thing. I can just be all of my things. And we go to, when we could go, we went to the theater on Sundays, you know, instead of, that was church. For my son and I, we'll go to church and really get in touch with ourself, our theater self, and love that. And the food, I mean, that can never go wrong. I remember my very first girlfriend ever, when I was in high school, I would take her to my grandma's house for Thanksgiving. But I tell you what, when you got a pot of greens and black-eyed peas and some dressing, everybody's all good. It does not matter who is what. You got a bowl of greens in front of you, your family, okay? Family.
So good. I think food for sure. And also I think I really love your point, Kenny, especially about like there's so many links that we are denied, but you know, a lot of us come from communalist cultures, and also people who have struggled so much. And in honoring that struggle, in the way I think about my intersectionality or my identities or whatever, is sort of in ways that I can fight to maintain them and fight also making those linkages with other communities, right? Whether it's the occupation of the US here, or it's the occupation of the US in Afghanistan or Iraq, or, you know, wherever it may be, we can build new communities with that, and fighting with one another is something that I value a lot.
And now I'm hungry. But there is something so beautiful about sharing a meal. I just have to piggyback on this. Like my first year as a paraeducator, I was working as an ESL para. They hired me because I spoke Spanish. I had one kid that spoke Spanish. Everybody else was from every place. I was like, I didn't even know these languages existed. So it was very, very different and new for me. But for Thanksgiving, we decided, you know, everybody just bring a dish from your community, your culture. And the parents came in and it was this huge feast. And the kids were like, even like trying to find ways to talk to each other in their own native languages. So I had a girl who normally speaks Tigrinya trying to learn Thai to ask his mom how she made the food. And it was just like, this is what we could be. This is what we could do. We are so close. It just feels like we're so close. And I just want it now. I mean, call me impatient if you want to, but like, there's so much potential for our beauty and our love if we just share it with one another. And I need it more. And yeah, okay, on that note, panelists, would you like to add any final words? No.
Just thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I was pretty nervous. I thought that I wasn't going to know enough. I'm like, why on earth? I mean, it's a lived experience. Intersectionality for me is very lived. And I was reading some of the things that we might be discussing, and I was like, this sounds like somebody smart. But that's me again. I'm trying to, break free of that condescending nature. I am very smart. And this went really well. I'm so pleased that my company to keep right here. I'm honored with all of your presence. I'm so glad to have been here with all of you, and I can't wait to work with all of you. Kenny, I think if I get in a room with you, my head's gonna pop off with excitement. I cannot wait. That is very exciting to me. to think of we might do a project together. So excited.
I'm excited too. Sorry, I'm like, yeah. I like, yes. I obviously I miss theater, huh? I miss like being in a room with people. But yeah, same as everyone. Yeah, han in my language, and thank you. It's so nice to be a part of this conversation. And I was also nervous coming in and looking at the stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh. And but I'm just so happy to even just listen to everything that was shared, and really just pleased to be a part of this group tonight. And what a pleasure to meet some of you for the first time and to see some of you again. And looking forward to the future and creating a better tomorrow through the art of theater, which I think is very possible and why probably we all are engaged with this art form in the first place. So yes, thank you.
Thank you all so much. This was, I mean, I learned a lot. You had my brain going, and from the comments, it looks like you had other people's brains going. Some people did share a couple of things. I'm not sure if everybody saw them, but if you're interested, Brian Eugenio Herrera has a good article on these topics that we're talking about in a 2015 issue of Youth Theater Journal called There is Power in Casting. So there's a little bit of reading matter if you are interested. I do want to thank our panelists for coming out again tonight. They were amazing, they were open, they were honest, and they were vulnerable. And I appreciate you taking that time to be brave with us and embarking on having this conversation, which is not always easy and has a lot to go with. And we also know that even though we've had this one conversation in this room, we know that the conversation is technically ongoing. We know that the work is going to continue, but this is a step to let everybody know, including our community, where we are mentally, what we also think as theater artists, what we think should happen, because we have a stake in this business, this industry, and we want to make it more communal, and we want to invite our communities to be a part of it and for them all to have access. And I'm so glad you were all here with us tonight. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.